January 1945. Early morning. Krakow outskirts. Snow lay thick on the ground, white and cold, covering ruined streets and silent fields. Lieutenant Charles Richardson, age 28, crouched behind a low ridge. Breath rose in soft clouds, fingers numb inside worn gloves. He watched the camp below. Rows of barracks, fences topped with barbed wire. Thin smoke drifted from chimneys into gray sky. Families huddled together. Children clutched small bundles of rags. Eyes wide, faces pale, bodies trembling from cold and hunger. A mother pressed her youngest to her chest, rocking gently. Soldiers adjusted their packs, checked straps of sleds carrying blankets and bread. The wind carried the smell of smoke, frost, and damp earth. Richardson's eyes scanned the perimeter. Guards moved slowly, rifles in hand, unaware. Every step mattered. Every gesture could decide life or death. He signaled a small advance. Sleds slid over snow, boots crunching softly. The first blankets and loaves of bread reached the waiting families. A boy of 10 clutched a blanket, lips trembling, a faint flicker of hope in his gaze. Richardson exhaled slowly, steadying himself. One decision, carefully executed, could save hundreds, perhaps thousands. The ridge remained quiet, snow glistening, waiting for the next move. By late 1944, the war in Europe was entering its final stages. Allied forces had pushed across France and Belgium. Canadian troops were advancing into German-occupied Poland. The Wehrmacht was weakening. Supply lines were stretched thin. At the same time, Nazi authorities accelerated efforts to evacuate concentration camps. Jews were forced on long marches westward, many collapsing from exhaustion. Extermination camps in occupied Poland, Auschwitz, Plaszow, and others were still operational. Guards enforced strict order with rifles, batons, and dogs. Prisoners had almost no food. Hunger and cold made every step a struggle. Disease spread easily. Typhus and dysentery were common. Families were often separated. Children clung to parents, afraid of being taken away. Canadian intelligence learned of planned evacuations, anticipating death marches. Lieutenant Richardson's unit received orders to secure areas around Krakow. Their mission included monitoring roads, assisting displaced civilians, and documenting atrocities. The soldiers knew what they might find: emaciated bodies, frozen limbs, children crying silently. Maps showed a network of rail lines connecting camps to western Germany. Rail transport was heavily guarded, but increasingly disrupted by Allied bombing raids. Richardson studied the routes carefully. Every delay could mean lives saved or lost. In the early hours, soldiers moved quietly through snow-covered villages. Smoke from destroyed buildings still hung in the cold air. Footsteps left tracks in frost, the only signs of life in abandoned streets. Civilians peeked from broken windows, eyes wary, clothing torn and patched. The unit passed small farms. Crops had been burned. Livestock was gone. Every resident carried stories of fear, forced labor, or hidden families. One soldier, Corporal Jameson, paused at a frozen stream, watching ice crack under his boot. He thought of letters from home, waiting unopened in Canada. The moral weight of the mission pressed on every soldier. Richardson briefed his men in hushed tones. They were instructed to move carefully, document what they could, and assist civilians without exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. The camp at Krakow was small but densely packed. Guards rotated in shifts. The prisoners were weak, scared and watchful. A small group of children had been hiding near the fences. Their parents were too ill to move. The soldiers observed quietly from cover. Even the faintest sound, a falling branch, a cough, could draw a guard's attention. Richardson knew timing was critical. Any sudden move could provoke violence. Maps and intelligence reports confirmed that evacuation orders had reached camp commanders. Prisoners had little choice but to follow instructions or face immediate punishment. Every officer in Richardson's unit understood the stakes. Saving lives required careful planning, discretion, and moral courage. In the ridge's cold light, Richardson traced the paths with his gloved fingers. He imagined families moving quietly through snow, children dragging small bundles of bread and blankets. The thought weighed heavily on him. For many prisoners, this was their last hope. Soldiers documented what they could: broken fences, worn clothing, emaciated faces. Medical kits were readied for anyone who could be treated on site. The first small groups of prisoners were guided carefully. Blankets were draped over thin shoulders. Bread was handed quietly. Richardson watched, noting each movement, ensuring that soldiers maintained calm. Even the slightest misstep could lead to chaos. Snow muffled the sounds of the operation, but tension remained high. The soldiers' breaths rose in small clouds. Hands shook slightly from cold and stress. Eyes darted toward watchtowers and fence lines. At the camp perimeter, prisoners hesitated. Children clung to parents. Mothers adjusted scarves. Richardson motioned to move forward in stages. The ridge provided cover, yet allowed observation of every action. Each family guided from the camp added a weight to Richardson's responsibility. He calculated routes to avoid patrols and maximize safety. For the first time in weeks, prisoners felt small relief. The soldiers' presence was a shield, and their careful actions were the first sign of aid many had seen in months. The winter sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the snow. Richardson noted the changing light, using it to coordinate movements. Every decision balanced safety, speed, and the chance to save lives. Above all, the soldiers understood one thing: human lives, not orders, were at stake. Each micro-decision, each careful step would ripple through the camp, shaping survival. The ridge remained silent witness. Snow glistened under pale light. The first blankets and bread prepared on sleds awaited their turn. One decision, made with courage and precision, could determine the fate of dozens or hundreds of prisoners.
The morning air bit sharply at exposed skin. Smoke drifted from nearby chimneys of bombed-out buildings. Richardson's soldiers moved quietly along frozen roads. Every shadow seemed suspicious. They carried rations, blankets, and first aid supplies. The camp's perimeter fence loomed ahead, rusted wire glinting in pale sunlight. Guards patrolled in short, careful steps. Prisoners huddled near the barracks, eyes wide and hollow. Children clutched thin coats, peering from behind emaciated adults. Richardson surveyed the layout. He noted guard rotations, patrol paths, and blind spots. Every second mattered. Orders had come from higher command: assist where possible, minimize violence, and document conditions. Soldiers prepared small sleds to carry blankets and food. The wind whistled through the trees. Branches scraped against frozen rooftops. A dog barked somewhere inside the camp. Prisoners flinched. Even a single shout could trigger punishment. Corporal Jameson adjusted a strap on his backpack. He checked rations for distribution. Every loaf and blanket could save a life. Soldiers whispered to each other, confirming positions. Each one understood the stakes. Nearby, A young mother shielded her child with her coat. Her eyes darted to every approaching figure. Richardson gestured to the sled team. They moved slowly, deliberately, keeping low and silent. The first group of prisoners hesitated at the fence. Their hands gripped wire. Fear and exhaustion were etched on every face. Some had lost family members along the way. The soldiers offered blankets, carefully draping them over shoulders. Bread was passed hand to hand. Every touch was gentle, deliberate, meant to reassure. Eyes met briefly. A silent understanding passed between rescuer and rescued. Richardson noted the smallest reactions: a slight nod, a trembling hand, a cautious step forward. The winter sun reflected off snow and frost. The cold air stung noses and cheeks. Soldiers' boots crunched over ice. Each step carried the potential for discovery. Nearby guards seemed unaware of small movements at the edge of the camp. Timing was everything. The first prisoners were guided to a concealed path behind tree lines. Sleds followed, loaded with blankets and food. Soldiers checked every corner before advancing. Children tripped over snowdrifts, laughing softly with relief. Adults kept pace, careful not to draw attention. The operation unfolded like a careful dance. Every moment balanced risk and compassion. Richardson thought of letters from his own family. He considered the bravery required to act humanely in such a harsh landscape. Nearby, Corporal Jameson carried a small child, placing a warm blanket around shoulders. The child looked up with eyes that had seen too much. A quiet smile touched the mother's lips. Soldiers remained vigilant, aware that guards could appear at any second. The group paused briefly behind a broken wall. Snow covered their tracks. Richardson checked maps again, confirming the safest route to transport prisoners further west. Small groups moved methodically, each step planned and observed. Prisoners whispered gratitude, though voices were hushed. The wind carried soft echoes of hope. Sunlight glinted on frost-covered rails, showing paths for the next groups. Every movement required patience, care, and unwavering attention. Soldiers rotated roles, some guiding, some watching, some keeping lookout. Each soldier carried the weight of decisions on their shoulders. The camp's fences were crossed slowly, deliberately. Bread was handed out, blankets secured. Eyes scanned for any sign of danger. The first stage of rescue was complete, but the challenge remained. Thousands still awaited, and timing with approaching enemy movements would determine success. The quiet winter landscape hid constant peril. Every shadow could conceal threat or opportunity. Richardson breathed deeply, keeping calm. He had to think 2 steps ahead, considering guards, terrain, and prisoner welfare. The sleds carried warmth, food, and small comfort, symbols of humanity in a desolate place. Children clung to blankets, holding them like treasures. Soldiers' gloved hands brushed ice-covered wood as they moved. Every micro moment of care increased the chance of survival. The ridge offered cover for observation, allowing them to plan next moves. A guard turned momentarily, unaware of the careful retreat of prisoners. Richardson signaled quietly to proceed. Every detail mattered: light, snow, wind, and the fragile trust of those being rescued. The first stage completed, soldiers prepared for the next wave. Each life saved added urgency, weight, and resolve. The quiet winter landscape remained cold and silent, witness to careful planning. Soldiers paused to check routes and supplies. Every breath was visible in the winter air, a reminder of the harsh reality. The prisoners looked forward cautiously, their steps tentative but filled with hope. Richardson's quiet determination ensured the operation would continue with care.
Prisoners huddled in thin coats, shoulders hunched against frost.
Children clutched blankets close, fingers red and raw. Eyes wide, they scanned every approaching figure, unsure if safety or danger had arrived. A mother adjusted her child's cap, whispering encouragement she barely felt herself. Hunger gnawed silently, an ache deeper than cold. Richardson's soldiers moved deliberately, offering food and warmth. Every gesture was small but significant. A loaf of bread passed hand to hand became a lifeline. Blankets draped over shoulders were heavier than cloth. They were reassurance. Prisoners whispered softly, gratitude mingling with disbelief. Some looked to each other as if confirming that this kindness was real. Hands lingered on fabric, testing the safety of touch. Eyes met briefly, conveying trust without words. Tears froze on cheeks. The winter wind carried faint sounds, distant boots, a barking dog, the scrape of sleds over ice. Every sound reminded prisoners of how close danger remained. Even a faint shout could bring punishment. Yet the soldiers' calm presence offered a fragile sense of order. The human spirit strained but endured. Children's eyes lit briefly when offered blankets. Adults exhaled, relief visible but cautious. The smallest acts, a pat on a shoulder, a careful step forward, shaped hope. Every movement was weighted with survival instinct. Prisoners began to walk, slower at first, then more confident. Their lives depended on timing, trust, and attention to detail. Richardson and his officers studied the terrain carefully. Frozen ground cracked underfoot, revealing footsteps for anyone following. Sled paths were chosen to avoid detection. Fences were observed for weak points. Blind spots were mapped. Timing coincided with patrol rotations. Soldiers moved quietly, communicating with hand signals. Every step minimized exposure. Weapons remained close but not threatening. Commanders monitored prisoner movement, balancing speed and safety. The ridge provided observation over the camp, allowing quick reaction if guards appeared. Snow reflected sunlight, revealing tracks instantly. Routes were planned to reduce crossings in open areas. Sleds were spaced strategically, so no single group drew attention. Orders emphasized caution, patience, and adaptability. Every terrain feature, ditch, mound, tree line was considered. The operation required coordination across dozens of soldiers and hundreds of prisoners. Errors could result in recapture or death. Every detail of the frozen landscape was a tactical factor. Richardson's decisions carried weight beyond immediate survival. He balanced compassion with military discipline. Orders had to be precise yet humane. He observed soldiers' reactions, adjusting instructions quietly. Trust was essential. Soldiers had to act with judgment. He understood that hesitation could endanger lives. Each choice, when to advance, when to pause, was moral and tactical. Corporal Jameson reported positions, suggesting minor adjustments. Richardson approved, knowing small insights mattered. Leadership meant observing not only enemies, but also prisoners' responses. Every nod, glance, and step could shift trust. He held the responsibility of thousands of lives. His presence was calm, steadying, instilling confidence. Orders emphasized small acts of kindness as operational tools. Soldiers learned that mercy and strategy could coexist. Decision-making relied on observation, patience, and ethical clarity. Guards patrolled the camp, unaware at first of subtle movements at the perimeter. Some paused at the wind, unsure of what carried on it. Discipline varied, some soldiers diligent, others distracted. Even brief lapses allowed prisoners to move undetected. Guards' ideology had desensitized them, yet human instinct still responded to unexpected calm. They scanned for threat, but missed gentle gestures, bread,
blankets, careful sleds. Suspicion existed, but structure and routine limited response time. For those guards who noticed movement, hesitation meant missed opportunity to intervene. The enemy's presence added tension, yet highlighted the audacity and planning of Richardson's team. Every shadow could conceal a threat, but patience and observation turned fear into calculated action.
Sleds creaked under weight, snow grinding beneath runners. Blankets, bread, and water barrels were stacked carefully, each load balanced to prevent tipping on uneven ice. Thermometers on packs indicated sub-zero temperatures. Soldiers checked rifles, though they were secondary to the humanitarian task. Communication relied on field radios, small but effective, keeping coordination precise. Maps marked fences, watchtowers, and pathways through frozen fields. Every detail calculated to avoid unnecessary exposure. Clothing layers preserved body heat, critical for long hours outside. Footwear left deep impressions in snow, tracked for potential extraction routes. Sled paths avoided obstacles, rocks, frozen puddles, remnants of ruined buildings. Crates were numbered for systematic distribution. Water barrels insulated to prevent freezing. Every technological element, sled, radio, map, rifle, served both survival and strategy. Efficiency reduced risk and allowed more lives to be reached. The smallest malfunction, a broken runner or frozen latch, could delay delivery. Soldiers checked straps repeatedly. Every step depended on the reliability of tools and equipment. Supplies were rationed carefully, ensuring continuity of operation. Timing of sleds, routes, and rest periods followed precise planning. Richardson considered the weight of every choice. Prisoners were human beings, not statistics. Soldiers were instructed to respect dignity, even under strict operational constraints. Each act of care was deliberate, bread in hand, blanket over shoulders. Every decision balanced immediate survival with long-term moral consequence. Leaders reflected on the consequences of action or inaction. Could the children and adults trust strangers in uniforms? Moral clarity guided small gestures that held immense value. Even hesitation was a decision. Choosing caution could preserve life. Acts of mercy became tactical tools. Soldiers realized the significance of compassion under fire. The line between duty and humanity blurred. Every movement respected human fragility, hunger, fear, and hope. Richardson reminded his men that these were lives at risk, not abstract targets. Quietly, responsibility settled on every individual's shoulders. The ethical choice demanded courage equal to battlefield bravery. Prisoners struggled to process unexpected kindness. Suspicion lingered in eyes and gestures. They weighed every motion, gauging threat and intent. Children clutched blankets, unsure if warmth could be trusted. Adults scanned surrounding guards, calculating safety. Soldiers felt the weight of observation, conscious of the human psyche in fragile balance. Richardson monitored reactions closely. Stress was palpable, but methodical movement calmed nerves. Small successes, bread handed safely, blankets draped, reinforced trust. Prisoners exhaled slowly, relief bleeding through tension. Soldiers' confidence grew alongside prisoners' cautious hope. Every micro-decision influenced overall operation success. Human psychology shaped pacing, approach, and interaction. Body language communicated safety where words were not necessary. Even glances and posture mattered, carrying reassurance. The cold, hunger, and fear created heightened sensitivity to gesture.
Understanding this psychology allowed soldiers to act decisively and compassionately. Operations relied on prior intelligence reports. Maps and prisoner lists guided decisions. Timing aligned with broader Allied advances through Poland. Canadian units knew that securing lives had ripple effects on morale, civilian support, and enemy compliance. Saving thousands was both humanitarian and strategic. Field reports highlighted the importance of calm execution. Success depended on planning, leadership, and precise action under winter conditions. Coordination with local guides and displaced persons aided navigation. Supply chains, though minimal, ensured continuation of effort. Every rescued life was recorded meticulously for post-war accountability. Strategic awareness guided every sled movement. Operations were discreet, avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Even small victories contributed to larger Allied objectives of liberation and stabilization. Soldiers recognized that their choices echoed beyond the camp. Each act reinforced principles that would shape post-war reconstruction and historical record.
March 20th, 1945. Early morning light broke weakly over the camp perimeter. Frost clung to barbed wire. Richardson checked sleds one last time. His breath was visible in the icy air. Soldiers adjusted blankets around their shoulders. Children and adults huddled behind buildings, shivering. Guards patrolled slowly, rifles slung but eyes alert. Richardson signaled a small advance. Sleds glided over packed snow, leaving parallel tracks. He watched a mother lift her baby higher for warmth. Each movement had to be careful, deliberate. A small misstep could alert the guards. The first crate of bread was placed at the edge of the barracks. A man, thin, face hollow, hesitated, then reached for it. Eyes flicked to nearby guards. He lifted a small loaf, cradled it like fragile life. Richardson nodded to his men. Blankets followed, draped gently over shoulders and knees. Another sled approached, carrying hot water in insulated barrels. Steam rose into the cold air, carrying warmth, smell, and reassurance. A child of 8 took a blanket, hiding it under a coat, eyes wide. A guard shifted, but did not intervene. Richardson held his breath. Timing and calm had prevented detection. The second sled delivered more bread, blankets, and a few jackets. Prisoners whispered, small murmurs of relief. Richardson moved toward the center of the camp, sled in hand. Each step measured. He glanced at the officers' list of names, verifying who had received aid. A boy, no older than 10, tripped over uneven snow. Richardson stooped, steadying him. The boy's eyes reflected astonishment and a fragile trust. Soldiers kept a discreet perimeter, rifles slung, posture relaxed but vigilant. The act of reaching out was silent but weighty. Prisoners began to take tentative steps toward the sleds. Richardson handed out the last of the bread. A woman clutched her child, lips moving in whispered gratitude. Some prisoners had tears, some merely nodded, expressions etched with relief. The sleds returned to the ridge for resupply. Richardson and his men communicated with gestures, avoiding sudden noises. Every sound carried potential risk. The day grew slightly brighter, but cold persisted. Snow reflected pale light into the eyes of those gathered. By mid-morning, over 100 prisoners had received food, blankets, and warmth. A small boy smiled faintly, the first in weeks. Richardson exhaled, steadying his hands. Each crate delivered increased morale, both among soldiers and prisoners. Orders emphasized caution, yet encouraged humanity. Soldiers saw themselves not only as liberators, but as witnesses to survival. Every movement balanced risk and compassion. By noon, the camp's atmosphere had shifted. Fear lingered, but hope began to thread through the crowd. Prisoners glanced at each other, assessing the safety of stepping closer.
Richardson mapped the next sled route mentally, noting obstacles and guard positions. Another delivery was underway. He noticed an older man, frail, reaching for bread and water. The man's hands shook, eyes reflecting years of fear and hunger. A soldier gently steadied him, muttering a quiet reassurance. The act carried weight beyond food. It carried dignity. Sleds continued to move, rotations timed precisely to avoid suspicion. Guards noticed activity, but assumed routine supply movements. Richardson's plan relied on speed, precision, and discretion. He signaled for the final batch. Soldiers positioned themselves around the perimeter, watching for any signs of interference. Prisoners moved with cautious optimism. Richardson felt a heavy calm. Each life saved today could ripple through weeks of liberation. By late afternoon, the final sled reached the far corner of the camp. Bread and blankets were distributed. Children wrapped themselves tightly, shivering less with warmth and security. Adults held each other, murmuring thanks. Richardson observed quietly, recording numbers and locations mentally. Every person accounted for. A small group of soldiers cleaned sleds, readying for extraction of survivors to safer zones. The tension eased slightly, but alertness remained. Richardson took a breath, eyes scanning the horizon. Snow sparkled under pale sunlight. The camp had not changed outwardly, but inside, transformation occurred. Fear had not vanished, but relief and humanity were tangible. Orders for evacuation were prepared. Richardson knew the next hours would test patience and coordination further. Every hand, every step, every sled would matter again. The first stage of rescue had succeeded. Lives had been spared through careful planning, empathy, and courage. And yet, the operation was far from over. Each survivor now carried hope, fragile but enduring, awaiting the next step towards freedom.
Late afternoon, March 20th, 1945. Sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the camp. Richardson checked the perimeter again. Snow crunched softly under boots. The prisoners huddled in groups, blankets tight around shoulders. Children whispered quietly, unsure if safety was real. The sleds had returned fully loaded for the next stage. Soldiers moved deliberately, maintaining calm posture. Richardson consulted his list. Names, ages, locations, all accounted for. The plan? Guide groups to temporary holding zones outside the camp. Every step required precision. A thin man with a hollow face followed quietly. He clutched a small bundle of clothing, glancing nervously at soldiers. A boy, no older than 9, held his mother's hand, stepping cautiously onto the sled path. Richardson offered a gentle nod. The boy's eyes widened, relief mixing with lingering fear. Soldiers guided groups in small clusters. Each sled carried only a few prisoners to reduce attention. A distant bell rang from the camp tower. Guards shifted. Richardson froze momentarily, then signaled soldiers to continue slowly. Snow reflected the fading sunlight, casting pale light on anxious faces. Women and children moved first, fragile bodies weighed down by blankets and fear. Richardson noticed an older woman, clutching a bundle of papers, letters, perhaps evidence, perhaps memories. A soldier lifted the bundle for her, careful not to jostle it. The woman's eyes welled with gratitude. Sleds glided over icy paths, rails groaning slightly under weight. Richardson kept his gaze ahead, aware of potential patrols. Each step measured, quiet, deliberate. Groups moved steadily, whispering thanks or instructions softly. The prisoners' expressions shifted slowly from fear to cautious trust. A child peeked at the soldiers' faces, searching for reassurance. One boy stumbled on a patch of ice. Richardson reached out, steadying him without a word. The child's small hand gripped his firmly.
Another sled approached from the barracks area. Inside, 3 women and 5 children waited, shivering. Blankets were draped, water barrels nearby, bread distributed. Richardson watched as they hesitated, then stepped forward. A guard glanced in their direction, but returned to his routine. Timing and calm had prevented confrontation. Soldiers guided the group along a cleared path to a nearby barn converted as temporary shelter. Inside, warmth from a small stove met the cold. Wood smoke mixed with the scent of bread and blankets. Children pressed against mothers, relief softening their features. Richardson noted their reactions quietly, understanding the small gestures mattered as much as food. Every human interaction reinforced trust. Outside, the snow crunched under returning sleds. More prisoners were guided along the same path, numbers rising steadily. Richardson coordinated silently with his team. Each cluster of survivors entered temporary shelter safely. A young woman, trembling, glanced at the Canadian soldiers. Her eyes reflected disbelief and gratitude. Richardson nodded, silently affirming their safety. The operation continued through the fading light. Every sled, every person, every step executed with care. Soldiers maintained vigilance, yet compassion guided actions. By evening, most prisoners had reached secure holding points. Children clung to blankets, mothers held them close, faces still pale but calmer. Richardson documented movements, ensuring no one was left behind. The camp remained outwardly silent. Inside, lives had shifted quietly but profoundly. Nightfall approached. Fires from temporary shelters glowed against the snow. Richardson checked final sleds. The last group, including elderly and infirm, moved slowly but steadily. Soldiers helped carry blankets and supplies. One frail man stopped, gripping a soldier's arm, whispering a wordless gesture of thanks. Richardson felt the weight of the moment. Decades of planning and risk had culminated in this human outcome. The guards were unaware of the subtle, careful rescue underway. By nightfall, 34,000 prisoners had been accounted for, many already on the path to temporary safety. Richardson reviewed the maps again, confirming all routes had been used efficiently. The snow reflected moonlight, cold and calm. The camp looked unchanged from the outside, yet inside, fear had begun to yield to hope. Soldiers returned empty sleds quietly. Prisoners huddled in warmth, finally able to rest. Richardson paused and looked at the small faces around him. Children slept. Mothers whispered prayers. Men held fragile dignity in their hands. The audacious plan had worked. The idea that had seemed crazy to colleagues had saved tens of thousands. Richardson exhaled, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet heroism achieved that day. The night held a calm that was rare, profound, and hard-won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new coordination, but tonight marked a human victory. The Canadian soldiers' courage, careful planning, and willingness to act beyond standard orders had changed lives forever. And the first glimmers of liberation and humanity had been restored.
Night had settled over the camp. Snow lay thick, untouched, reflecting moonlight in pale silver. Inside the temporary shelters, quiet murmurs replaced fear. Blankets covered trembling shoulders. Children clutched small possessions, worn and fragile. Mothers whispered reassurances they barely believed themselves. Richardson moved slowly through the rows, observing each face. Eyes told stories of exhaustion, disbelief, and fragile relief. The air smelled of wood smoke, bread, and wet wool. Soldiers brought water and rations, careful not to startle anyone. One man, gray-haired and thin, traced a hand over his chest,
silently counting survival. A young boy peeked from under a blanket, glancing at Richardson, searching for reassurance. A soldier knelt beside him, gently adjusting the boy's coat. A woman cradled an infant, rocking slowly, singing a quiet, trembling song. Each small gesture carried immense weight. The magnitude of the rescue began to sink in. 34,000 prisoners had been accounted for, moved to temporary safe points. Each step executed with meticulous care, every sled and group tracked. Richardson reviewed lists by lantern light, names checked, ages verified, health conditions noted. A few sick and elderly had required extra attention, transported on sleds with blankets and care. The operation had avoided direct confrontation with guards. No blood had been shed during the rescue itself. The prisoners' morale shifted subtly but profoundly, from despair to cautious hope, from fear to trust, however tentative. Soldiers noted hesitant smiles, whispered thanks, the soft clasp of hands. The Canadian team exchanged quiet nods, understanding the quiet significance. Orders had been followed precisely, yet compassion had guided every decision. Reports would later describe this as a model of humane action under extreme conditions. Families huddled together, some holding small personal items, letters, photographs, scraps of clothing. Every object carried a story, a reminder of the life they were fighting to preserve. The faint sound of distant engines reminded Richardson of ongoing operations in surrounding areas. The war had not ended, but tonight, a small corner of it had been changed. Food was distributed carefully, portioned to reach all, including children who had gone days without adequate nourishment. A soldier knelt to offer a warm loaf to an elderly woman. Her hands shook, tears forming as she accepted it silently. Children ate quickly, hungrily, but under careful watch, ensuring no accidents or injuries. The shelter's interior was filled with the quiet crackle of fires, the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of blankets. No one spoke loudly. The atmosphere demanded reverence and calm. Richardson moved outside briefly, checking the frozen paths. Sleds had been returned to staging areas, footprints marking careful, measured movement. The snow reflected pale moonlight. Outside, the camp appeared unchanged, yet inside, life had returned. The human cost of inaction had been avoided by a single courageous plan. Soldiers settled for the night, exhaustion pressing against their bodies. Prisoners slept, some fitfully, some deeply, finally safe from immediate threat. Richardson paused, looking at the calm, pale faces around him. The weight of responsibility pressed lightly. Success had been measured not in weapons fired, but in lives preserved. Orders had been executed, but humanity had been restored. The night was quiet, almost impossibly calm after days of tension. Each survivor represented resilience, courage, and the extraordinary result of careful moral decision-making. By dawn, supplies would need replenishing, routes would need rechecking, but tonight, fear had given way to relief. Richardson understood that the act of rescue, though operationally complex, had been deeply human. The prisoner's eyes reflected that understanding, even in exhaustion. History would remember the scale of the operation, but the quiet moments, the hand extended, the loaf of bread offered, the blanket draped over shoulders, were what truly mattered. The Canadian soldiers' daring initiative had created not just survival, but dignity. And dignity, in that frozen, desolate place, was the most profound victory of all.
Morning light seeped through pale clouds. Snow glistened on the edges of the camp, soft and untouched.
Richardson walked among the rows, observing the survivors. Children clutched small blankets, eyes wide, cheeks flushed from warmth and lingering cold. Mothers checked infants, whispering names softly. A few elderly men sat silently, hands folded, reflecting on the night's events. Every face bore the marks of hunger, fear, and relief. Supplies were being replenished. Food, blankets, water, all carefully organized for the day ahead. Canadian soldiers moved calmly, coordinating logistics. Each action precise, each gesture deliberate. The scale of the rescue became clear. 34,000 prisoners had been moved safely from immediate danger. Reports were filed meticulously, noting names, conditions, and movements. Officers reviewed the operation with sober satisfaction. Orders had been followed. Lives had been preserved. The camp remained intact, fences unbreached, guards unaware of the rescue's subtle execution. Prisoners began to interact cautiously. Some spoke softly with neighbors. Others walked slowly, testing legs stiffened by cold and confinement. Children held hands, sharing blankets and small morsels of bread. Silence carried its own significance, a quiet testament to survival. Richardson paused at the edge of a cleared path. Footprints in the snow marked the careful progression of sleds, soldiers, and rescued families. Each step deliberate, each route considered to avoid unnecessary attention or conflict. Soldiers exchanged brief nods, acknowledging exhaustion and the quiet triumph. Letters and small personal items were gathered carefully, returned to their owners when possible. A boy of 12 pressed a small photograph into his coat, eyes wide. It was a fragment of a life nearly lost. The practical measures, food, blankets, transport, were crucial, but the psychological impact was equally profound. Fear had been replaced, if only partially, with trust. Trust in human decency. Trust in deliberate, careful action. Camp officers made note of the Canadian initiative. Reports would later describe it as an example of ethical decision-making in the field. Survivors would recount quiet gratitude in memoirs. Some would speak of small gestures, the loaf of bread, the warm blanket, the steady hand. The soldiers themselves reflected quietly. Exhaustion pressed against their bodies. Moral satisfaction pressed against their minds. The operation had been dangerous, complex, and morally challenging. Yet success had been achieved through discipline, courage, and careful humanity. By midday, movement continued. Supply sleds returned. Medical teams began checks on the weak and ill. The scale of the rescue required organization beyond immediate human attention. Yet each soldier understood the personal importance of their actions. The rescued individuals, now safe, would carry the memory forward. In eyes and gestures, small acts of kindness and precision left lasting impact. Even among the exhausted, a faint, steady hope glimmered. History would record the numbers, 34,000 lives saved. But in the quiet of the camp, the human moments endured longer. Children learning warmth, mothers seeing safety, soldiers witnessing life preserved. Richardson stood at the center of the camp. He observed faces softened from fear, stiffened by endurance, yet beginning to relax. He understood that the rescue's significance was not just operational, but profoundly moral. Humanity had prevailed in a place defined by cruelty. The frozen ground, the silent barracks, the lingering cold, they all bore witness to a quiet, resilient triumph. The Canadian soldiers' initiative had proven that careful action, empathy, and courage could preserve life even amid the chaos of war. And for those who survived,
the memory of that calm, measured, life-saving effort would remain indelible.
The snow lay soft over the camp, undisturbed now by the night's hurried movements. Sunlight filtered weakly through winter clouds, casting pale shadows over the barracks. Children clutched blankets, some still trembling, others exploring small spaces with cautious curiosity. Mothers held infants close, whispering quietly, the rhythm of survival resuming slowly. Lieutenant Richardson walked along the cleared paths, boots crunching lightly on frost. Each step measured, reflective. He observed the faces of those he had helped save, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, expressions still fragile. Every glance told a story of fear, endurance, and cautious hope. The operation had been meticulously planned. It had required courage, restraint, and careful moral judgment. Canadian soldiers had executed orders with precision, yet their humanity defined the outcome. No lives were lost in the rescue. Thousands had been preserved from imminent danger. Historians would later note this operation as an example of moral courage in wartime. Not just the number, 34,000 lives saved, but the deliberate choice to act with empathy under extreme risk. The camp's quiet reflected a larger truth. Even amid war's machinery of cruelty, human decency could prevail. Prisoners began to speak softly among themselves, sharing food, blankets, and small comforts. They had been touched by deliberate care, by measured kindness that defied orders, circumstance, and fear. The soldiers carried their own reflections, exhaustion mixed with moral clarity. They understood that history would remember acts of courage, but it was in these small gestures that humanity endured. Richardson paused at the ridge, looking over the camp one final time. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and frost. He allowed himself a quiet exhale. In that moment, the boundaries between enemy and ally, fear and hope, survival and morality blurred. Time would move on. Wars would end. Names would be recorded, reports filed, and medals considered. But the human choice to preserve life, to act with care, to value every individual remained the lasting legacy. For those 34,000 souls, the quiet morning marked not only survival, but the profound imprint of empathy. History remembers battles, strategies, and losses. Yet it is in acts of deliberate humanity that the truest lessons endure. Imagine the children, decades later, recalling warmth in the cold, safety in the shadows, kindness in the midst of terror. And consider the soldiers whose careful decisions allowed hope to flourish where fear once ruled. Humanity, when chosen deliberately, leaves an echo far louder than any gunfire.